On a quiet August evening in 1944, long after the guns had faded and the dust of retreating armies hung in the air, a strange sound drifted across the French countryside. It wasn't the roar of tanks or the shriek of artillery. It was the steady, growing hum of engine set, thousands of themen rolling through the night like a river of steel cutting across a wounded land. To German commanders studying their maps miles away, such a sound should have been impossible. According to every rule of European warfare, an army that outran its supplies was an army already defeated. Distance was supposed to be the great equalizer line every advancing force eventually could not cross. By their calculations, the Americans had crossed it days earlier. Yet something was moving out there in the darkness, something they had not prepared for. How did an army that should have been immobilized by mathematics continue to accelerate across France? And who were the many of? Many of them young, exhausted, and denied full rights in their own country, who kept those engines roaring through the night? The answer was a logistics miracle the German General Staff never imagined. But history remembers it by a simpler name, the Red Ball Express. Long before the Red Ball Express carved its path across France, German commanders believed they already understood the limits of mechanized war. They had learned those limits the hard way. On the vast steppes of Russia, their panzers had surged forward only to stall when roads dissolved into mud, when horses, still the backbone of their transport, lagged behind steel columns, and when railway tracks of the wrong gauge trapped supplies hundreds of miles from the front. To the Wehrmacht, logistics wasn't an abstract concern. It was the force that had strangled their greatest offensives. And now, in the summer of 1944, they believed the Americans were about to meet the same fate. From East Prussia, German staff officers studied the terrifying speed of Patton's Third Army, 12 divisions pushing more than 400 miles in little more than a month. No army in European memory had moved like this. But the numbers, the Germans believed, made the situation unsustainable. An armored division needed 150,000 gallons of fuel each day. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies. An armored division demanded 1,000. Patton commanded 12 of them. The math seemed absolute. The Americans had crossed a distance that no amount of optimism could overcome. The laws of physics, as one German general wrote, "IOC cannot be violated, not even by American industry. East. Meanwhile, along the shattered roads of northern France, the Americans saw a different kind of problem. The rail network was ruined. Bridges were blown apart. Depots were too far behind to support the pace of the advance. Traditional logistics, slow, scheduled, procedurally perfect tech, had collapsed under the weight of American momentum. Something new was needed, something no manual had ever described. On August 25, 1944, inside a requisitioned French chateau, a small group of exhausted officers gathered around Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres of the Motor Transport Service. Their charts showed the problem plainly. Patton was consuming supplies faster than any army in history. If nothing changed, he would stop within days. But Ayres proposed something that defied doctrine, transforming the roads of France into a one-way, non-stop supply highway running from Cherbourg and the Normandy beaches directly to the front. 20 hours of driving out of every 24. No blackout discipline. Headlights blazing at night. No stopping except for fuel or mechanical failure. A 5-minute interval between convoys. A rolling artery of trucks stretching across the country, feeding an army that refused to slow down. To the officers in that room, the idea sounded reckless. To the Germans, had they heard it, it would have sounded suicidal. But to Ayres, it was the only answer to a simple reality. The wariest, fastest army needed, the wariest, fastest supply line, and within 36 hours, the impossible had begun to take shape. Thousands of trucks, thousands of men, and a vision of logistics that would rewrite the rules of modern war. When the first convoys rolled out on August 26, 1944, the Red Ball Express did not resemble a traditional military operation. It looked more like an industrial, tidy, unbroken, unrelenting, indifferent to weather, road conditions, or the expectations of European commanders. 2 parallel one-way highways cut across France, one for loaded trucks racing toward the front, the other for empty vehicles barreling back to the coast. Military police guarded intersections. Maintenance units leapfrogged forward every 50 miles. And the convoys themselves, 60 or 70 trucks at a time. Miami departed at 5-minute intervals, day and night, without pause. The backbone of this system was the GMC CCKW2W 2 truck, the AS Deuce and a half East WA machine so standardized that American mechanics could swap an engine in 45 minutes under roadside floodlights. But the true force that powered the Red Ball Express was human endurance. Of the 23,000 drivers, roughly 3/4 were African-American soldiers serving in a segregated Army, young men who were denied entry to restaurants back home, yet were now responsible for keeping Patton's armored divisions alive. They painted names on their trucks: Detroit to Berlin Express, Patton's, Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come. Within days, they developed an informal culture of speed, grit, and mutual responsibility. If a vehicle slowed below 20 miles per hour, it was pushed into a ditch. The mission came first. German reconnaissance units were the first to realize something extraordinary was happening. Observers stationed along wooded ridges reported an unbroken chain of headlights stretching for 20 kilometers. No blackout discipline, no spacing, just motion on constant, reckless, fearless motion. To the Wehrmacht, this violated every principle of survival. A single artillery strike could have obliterated an entire convoy. A Luftwaffe attack could have turned the roads into burning corridors of wreckage. But the Luftwaffe was crippled. The roads were open, and the Americans seemed to understand something the Germans did not. In modern war, volume could replace caution. As the Red Ball Express hit its rhythm, the impact on the battlefield was immediate. Patton's armored divisions began to move at a pace that stunned both allies and enemies. German doctrine calculated that an armored unit might sustain a 20-mile advance on a perfect day. Yet with Red Ball trucks waiting at every resupply point, American divisions routinely pushed 40 to 60 miles. On September 1st, the 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles before noon, refueled from arriving Red Ball convoys, and then drove another 32 miles before sunset. For German officers studying these reports, disbelief became dread. Heinz Guderian, father of Blitzkrieg, refused at first to accept the number scenes could endure that many miles in so little time. But the intercepted American radio traffic confirmed it. What the Germans faced was no longer Blitzkrieg as they defined it. It was a form of warfare powered by an industrial engine they had never imagined, a relentless tempo made possible by thousands of drivers who turned the roads of France into a river of fuel, ammunition, and momentum. As Patton's army surged deeper into France, the Red Ball Express began to strain under the very success it had created. Every mile gained on the battlefield added another mile to the trucks behind it, stretching the supply line toward a breaking point no logistics system had ever faced. By early September, a single round trip from the coast to the front exceeded 700 miles. Trucks ran nearly non-stop. Drivers say, many barely 20 years old, pushed through exhaustion, hallucinations, and the constant vibration of engines that never cooled. Some remained behind the wheel for 72 hours, their eyes burning, their hands trembling from fatigue and benzodrine. Mechanical failure became a daily certainty. Roughly 1,800 trucks broke down every 24 hours, collapsing under overloaded cargo and shattered suspensions. Maintenance crews turned the roadsides into makeshift workshops, crawling beneath steaming engines in the rain, the darkness, or the rising dust. They developed the triage system, 15 minutes to repair what could be repaired. Anything worse was dragged into a ditch, cannibalized for parts, and abandoned. By late September, over 5,000 vehicles had been consumed by the operation in more trucks than the entire German army possessed in France. The human cost was steeper. Accidents on narrow French roads killed hundreds of drivers. Fog caused chain collisions. Overheated engines ignited beneath fuel tankers. A single mistake on a crowded night convoy could send a truck tumbling into a ravine. Yet morale held. The men knew they were sustaining the fastest advance in Allied history, and many understood something deeper. Every mile they delivered was a blow against the Nazi ideology that had declared them inferior. But the Red Ball Express did more than sustain momentum. It reshaped the battlefield itself. At Metz, American artillery unleashed a bombardment that stunned German observers, 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. German analysts estimated that such a barrage should have required 50 truckloads of ammunition every hour. The Red Ball delivered it without pause, then supplied a 20% surplus. Meanwhile, German artillery units defending the same city were rationed to 50 rounds per gun per day. The imbalance was overwhelming, one side burning ammunition at industrial scale, the other scraping the bottom of empty depots. By mid-September, German intelligence believed the American system was beginning to collapse. Convoy spacing increased, truck speeds dipped, and drivers were visibly exhausted. It appeared, for a moment, that Patton would finally face the same paralysis that had crippled German offensives in Russia. But within 72 hours, the Americans adapted. They created intermediate transfer points that halved driver distances, reorganized routes, doubled vehicle assignments, and established forward maintenance hubs. By September 12th, the impossible had happened again. Daily tonnage increased. What should have been the breaking point became another surge of momentum. The lesson for German commanders was devastating. Their hopes of halting Patton along the Moselle or at the Siegfried Line depended on distance and delay. But distance had ceased to matter, and delay had become impossible. The Red Ball Express had absorbed the worst the war could throw at it, and instead of slowing, it grew stronger. To American commanders watching the Red Ball Express in motion, the operation revealed a truth they had long understood but never witnessed at such scale. In industrial war, logistics was not simply supporting AI, it was the decisive arm of strategy. Eisenhower himself visited the convoys in September 1944, standing beside roads lined with exhausted drivers who had been operating for 20 hours straight. Many were African-American soldiers serving in a segregated army, forced to eat in separate facilities at home, yet entrusted with sustaining the most mobile fighting force on the continent. Observing them, Eisenhower remarked that these men were winning the war as surely as any infantry, a statement that would echo through post-war debates on military integration. To the American public, the Red Ball Express remained largely invisible during the war, overshadowed by the drama of infantry assaults and tank battles. But within the military, it triggered a re-evaluation of long-held assumptions. The operation demonstrated that decentralized decision-making, mass production, and rapid improvisation could outperform rigid doctrine. Sergeants and lieutenants made choices that, in the Wehrmacht, required signatures from colonels. Supply depots appeared in fields overnight. Roads became arteries of national power. The United States discovered that its strength was not only in tanks or aircraft, but in the ability to mobilize an entire industrial society behind its armies. For the Germans, the Red Ball Express produced a strategic reckoning. Reports filtering into Berlin and East Prussia revealed an enemy operating at a tempo they could neither match nor disrupt. Luftwaffe units lacked the fuel and aircraft to threaten the convoys. Artillery bombardment proved useless against roads constantly repaired and routes constantly shifted. Field Marshal von Rundstedt famously concluded that the Americans had made distance irrelevant, erasing what had once been the most dependable constraint on mechanized warfare. Across Europe, the Red Ball Express reshaped civilian perceptions as well. French towns that had endured years of scarcity under German occupation now watched endless streams of American trucks carrying food, ammunition, and gasoline. Children lined the roads, receiving candy, soap, or rations from drivers who had little but still gave freely. The convoys became a symbol of abundance, a stark contrast to the austerity imposed by the occupying power. Reports from the German intelligence service noted that resistance activity surged wherever the Red Ball passed, fueled not by propaganda, but by the simple evidence that liberation came with resources, not ration cards. By the autumn of 1944, the world had witnessed something new, a demonstration that industrial democracy could outproduce, outsupply, and outlast a totalitarian regime that had defined itself by discipline and efficiency. The Red Ball Express was more than a logistical marvelous. It was a statement of American capability that reshaped strategic thinking on both sides of the Atlantic. By the time the Red Ball Express shut down in November 1944, The roads of France bore the marks of a miracle that had lasted just 82 days. Ruts carved deep into the earth. Bridges hastily rebuilt. Abandoned trucks rusting in ditches like silent memorials to the men who refused to stop driving. The operation dissolved almost as quickly as it had appeared, but its impact remained etched not only into the landscape, but into the very shape of the Allied victory. In the months that followed, German officers studying their defeat reached a sobering conclusion. Their armies had not been broken solely by superior tactics or battlefield maneuvers. They had been overtaken by a nation that could turn factories, railroads, and city streets into instruments of war. In their final interrogations, many German generals spoke of the shock they felt watching American trucks pour across France in endless columns. "We prepared for your tanks," one of them admitted. We never prepared for your trucks, For the United States, the legacy was larger than a single campaign. The Red Ball Express demonstrated that modern war belonged to the side that could deliver refuel, ammunition, rations, spare parts many faster than any enemy could destroy them. It proved that logistics was not merely the backbone of strategy, but its beating heart. And it showed the world that industrial democracy, with all its imperfections and contradictions, could mobilize a force greater than the sum of its parts. The men who carried that legacy were the drivers themselves, AC-2 3,000 soldiers, many of them African-American, who fought their war behind the wheel. They confronted exhaustion, danger, discrimination, and the cold indifference of history. Yet they kept driving mile after mile, proving through action what had been denied to them in words, that courage, discipline, and excellence belonged to no single race. Their contribution helped lay the groundwork for a different America after the war, one that would eventually recognize the injustice of segregation and the power of those who had served under its shadow. Today, the lessons of the Red Ball Express still echo through every modern conflict. Logistics determines momentum. Momentum shapes strategy. And strategy decides the fate of nations. The convoys that roared across France at 35 miles per hour did more than keep Patton moving. They redefined what victory looked like in the industrial age. What about you? When you think back on this extraordinary operation, what stands out most, the scale, the sacrifice, or the surprising truth that trucks, not tanks, may have been the most decisive weapon of 1944? Share your thoughts below. And if you Eastie like to explore more stories where warfare, history, and human endurance collide, join us for the next chapter.